liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So this is not just a history lesson. These are time-tested, blood-bought, and understood principles. What we're doing today is we're going to take a historical journey. We're going to parallel the events of 1774, when one governor disarms one town, and see if maybe we can see some similarities today. Does history repeat? Patrick Henry said, "I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past." By the time we are done here this evening, you will be completely convinced that Patrick Henry knew what he was talking about. Those of you who attended, raise your hand if you attended the genealogy class last night, the history of the Constitution. Did you see history repeat last night? Yes. Just a little bit or a lot? With precision. How many of you have attended the state sovereignty class, the solutions? See, okay, raise your hands up high. Those of you who have not attended that class, talk to the people who have, because we're teaching that class again tomorrow night in Bonners Ferry. Was that class important? Awesome. Did it give you the right now solutions to the federal government out of control? Yes. Real practical solutions that you can put in your own hands. And this is what we're doing today, because you see, we cannot reclaim America until we reclaim our past. We cannot forge forward in defense of liberty if we do not know the lessons that we should have been learning. You see, here's the problem. I still see too many conservatives willing to trade liberty for security or prosperity. That's not how you get that. That's not what Patrick Henry said. Patrick Henry did not say, "Give me prosperity or give me death." He did not say, "Give me national security or give me death." He said, "Give me liberty." Liberty. But if we cannot define liberty, how are we going to defend it? And yet when we have so many conservatives in our media and in our politicians willing to trade our liberties, one of the questions we're going to ask today and answer today is, do you have the right to keep and bear arms? Yes. Well, I think we're confused, because we allow our states to make us ask permission. If you have a right to keep and bear arms, it is irrelevant what government entity is telling you you have to ask permission, because the moment you have to ask permission to exercise a right, it's no longer a right, it's a privilege. Now let's be clear. You can forfeit your right if you harm someone else. You use your liberty to deprive someone else of theirs, that's the end of your liberty. That is the fundamental truth about liberty. How many of you have read the treatise of John Locke? Okay. How many of you have understand the principles of natural law? Natural law, John Locke. All of our founders knew. Benjamin Franklin wrote about it in the Silence Do-Good letters as well, that liberty should know no bounds except that you cannot harm another. Samuel Adams said, "Among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, life; secondly, liberty; third, property; together, number 4, with the right to protect and defend them in the best means possible." Your right to keep and bear arms stems from a natural right. Samuel Adams said it all stems from the first law of nature, the right of self-protection. preservation. I wonder how much we'll love our prosperity when our governments are regulating us out of our lives and our land. I wonder how much we're going to love our national security when we no longer have the right to defend ourselves. Because if you have to ask permission to defend yourself, then your life, your very life becomes a privilege. So let's look at this history and see what our framers knew when they believed that everybody had a right to keep and bear arms. Now, we didn't invent liberty in 1776. Our liberty movement, our independence movement from Great Britain did not begin in 1776. And as a matter of fact, our independence movement from Great Britain actually began in 1761 with this man, James Otis Jr. James Otis Jr. was an attorney who had received the highest post that an attorney can receive from the king. So remember, in the early American colonies, we were all subjects of the Crown of Great Britain, and the king and Parliament assigned jobs. The king assigned James Otis Jr. with the responsibility of enforcing the laws of the crown, ensuring proper prosecution of those who broke the laws. But we're having a problem now, because James Otis Jr. was raised understanding liberty. His father was an attorney, and he was raised understanding the Liberty Charters. You guys remember from our class last night, the 5 Liberty Charters that guaranteed all Englishmen the certain enumerated, or the certain guaranteed codified rights. Government could not, we didn't invent this stuff. Government has been limited throughout our history since 1014. And this is what James Otis Jr. was taught. Only now he was feeling conflicted by the job that the government had given him to do and his understanding of all the rights that were guaranteed to all Englishmen. You see, the Boston Tea Party wasn't about tea. It wasn't even about taxes. We were not a group of people who decided to go to war with their government because we didn't want to pay our fair share of taxes, in spite of what the Common Core textbooks are teaching, and in spite of what you may hear from the tour guide at Independence Hall. Our framers were not a bunch of rich, elitist slave owners that did not want to pay their fair share of taxes. You see, it was much more than that. Great Britain had gone into debt defending the American colonies in the French and Indian War, and they wanted to pay off that debt as soon as possible. So they started passing taxes, consumption taxes, like sales taxes, on the American colonists. This was not the beginning of the despotism. This was the beginning of their awakening to the despotism. Because for quite some time, Parliament was refusing to allow the American colonists representation in Parliament. Representation was guaranteed to all Englishmen since 1215. And the colonists are saying all these laws that you keep passing on us are illegal because we have no representation. Parliament said, don't be ridiculous. Of course you have representation. We have people in Parliament who have volunteered to represent your interests. The colonists said, seriously? If they're over there on the island creating laws that are being forced over here on our continent, and they never have to come over here and live under the laws that they make, then they don't represent us. See, that's a little history lesson we'd do well to learn, don't you think? That when the people who make the laws are not subject to the laws that they make. They do not represent us. They only represent themselves and their own interests. I was in the military. I was in the Army, military intelligence. I know that there are now people in Leavenworth serving sentences for less than Hillary Clinton did.
Oh, yeah.
Under the very same statute. So when the people who make the laws and are supposed to enforce the laws are above the law, you no longer have a representative government. You have a totalitarian one. So they decided to pass these consumption taxes because they weren't listening to the colonists, right? They had no representation, no reason to listen to them. And they started taxing certain specific things so that they could recoup their debt quickly. They taxed linen, lumber, sugar, tea, paper, and ink. Now, of that list of taxes, what do you suppose was the most offensive tax to our framers? And it wasn't tea. Paper and ink. And it wasn't a freedom of press issue either. Because you see, our right to due process had been established since 1215. Clauses 38 through 40 of the Magna Carta established that English subjects had a right to due process. And they said, wait a minute. In order for us to exercise our right to due process, we have to pay the government a tax to get paper and ink, because you can't engage in your right to due process without filing paperwork with the court. And they said, by having to pay a tax on paper and ink, it turns our right to due process into a privilege. And that is despotism. Because you see, if the government can decide who, where, when, and how you exercise your right to due process, you have no recourse in a system of corrupted courts. Well, they weren't collecting their taxes quick enough, so they got a brilliant idea. We can maximize our revenue from these consumption taxes by mandating that the colonists purchase the taxed items. And if they refuse to purchase the taxed items, we will arrest them. That's part of the pretended offenses that Jefferson was talking about in the Declaration of Independence. We will arrest them, we will throw them on a boat, and we will send them to Canada to be tried, to Quebec specifically, to be tried for their crimes. Why Quebec? Well, technically they were okay because Quebec was a British colony at the time. But it was a unique British colony because Quebec had successfully petitioned Parliament to keep French law in their borders. And French law does not give you a right to a trial by jury of your peers. That was something codified in British law. So no law is any good unless you can enforce it, right? So we're mandating that the colonists purchase the taxed items. How do we make sure they're doing that? Well, that's just simple and easy. We'll give the tax collectors and the customs agents the authority to search and seize the homes and the businesses without due process, without proper warrants. See, we didn't go to war with our own government over taxes or tea. It was legislation without representation, mandated purchases, warrantless searches, denial of due process, and being subject to foreign courts and foreign law. Go ahead, test me out. Read the Declaration of Independence. You've got to get to the 17th grievance before you see any mention of taxes. So now we have a problem. Because James Otis Jr. is well versed in history. He is well versed in the liberties that are guaranteed of all Englishmen. And now the king is telling him, your job is to enforce these warrantless searches. And he can't do it. So he resigns his position. Now, Otis, as an attorney, could simply go back to practicing law, hang up a shingle and do what attorneys did in 1761. But that's not who Otis was. He couldn't stand by and watch this happen. This to his friends and family members and countrymen. So he started trying to inform the public about how the government was violating their liberty by violating their right to property and privacy, violating their right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. He started teaching, he started handing out pamphlets, he started writing in the newspapers, he started doing everything that he could to inform the people. He became a whistleblower. This former government employee who became aware of the government violating the liberties of the people by violating their right to privacy and property became a whistleblower. Are we seeing any parallels already? Anybody know the name Edward Snowden? Okay, so this is probably going to chap a few people, but I'm sorry, the truth is not fair and balanced, and I think we need to just get this out there. Edward Snowden is not a traitor. Edward Snowden told us what the government was doing behind our backs in violation of our guaranteed essential natural rights. Where would we be today in our awareness if Edward Snowden had said nothing? I mean, seriously, if you're going to get mad about this, you need to get mad at the NSA. You need to get mad at the FBI. You need to get mad at the DOJ for violating our rights, not for Snowden exposing it. And that's what Otis did. Exposed the government's trampling on the liberties of the people. Think about that. Where would we be if Snowden hadn't told us what we did, what the government was doing? Last year, the Wall Street Journal did a Freedom of Information Act request on the Department of Justice. Found out in this Freedom of Information Act request, the Department of Justice last year admitted that they have been using those cameras in the interstates and on your street corners to take pictures of our license plates and document the occupants of our vehicles and storing them up since 2008. If you'd gone to your neighbor in 2008 and said, "Did you know the federal government is taking pictures of us as we drive our car and they're storing up those pictures?" what would your neighbor have told you in 2008? You're crazy? But now the government is admitting they've been doing that since 2008. Doesn't that sort of beg the question of what they're doing now they're not admitting to? So don't worry, Otis wasn't any more welcomed in his community than Snowden is today. He was called everything but a good Christian man. He was outcast in his communities. He was told by fellow lawyers, "Shut your mouth, Otis. If you don't shut your mouth, you're never going to practice law again anywhere in the kingdom." Can you imagine the people coming to Otis? "What's the matter with you, James? Why are you so upset about the government wanting to simply enforce the law? Are you possibly one of those people that doesn't want to pay their fair share of taxes? You don't want the government to enforce the law because you have something to hide? Is that why you're opposed to this? Sounds to me like you're hiding something." Otis would say, "I have nothing to hide. I have everything to preserve." Otis was finally approached by two business owners because, you see, these searches and seizures were completely arbitrary. Handwritten warrants, quite literally, Standing on the porch, the agent with a pen and a quill, or with a quill and a paper saying, Colonist Smith, by the authority vested in me by the crown, I will now search and see, signed me. That's it. No due process, no checks and balances. Those were guaranteed since 1215. And then they would search and they would seize. Complete arbitrary power. Now just imagine how this works, right? You have a friend who is a customs agent, and your business competitor is giving you a hard time. So you just send your friend, the custom agent, over to raid your competitor, and then what happens? What if you have an agent that's got a grudge, who doesn't like you? Then what is secure when there is no check and balance? And here are the whole cold, hard facts, since we're all adults here in the room. These agents were not just simply searching and seizing linen, lumber, sugar, tea, paper, and ink. They were searching and seizing our wives and daughters. Let me ask you, how many people exercising arbitrary power? How many people have to exercise arbitrary power before that power becomes evil? Just one. How many realize it's a matter of human nature that evil people gravitate to arbitrary power? So you now know what Otis was up against, the conflict. And so these businessmen come to Otis in 1761 and say, we are going to lose everything if we don't do something. Otis, will you help us bring this before the courts? Otis agrees to take up this case, a constitutional law case, if you will, against the government's violation of clauses 38 through 40 in the Magna Carta. Here's the crazy thing. The minute Otis files these cases, the government conveniently forgets that James Otis Jr. resigned his post and charges him with abandoning his post, which is treason, which means he could be shot on sight. It is now February 1761. And I want to sort of put you in James Otis Jr.'s shoes. Think about this now. There is no liberty movement. In 1761, there are no Sons of Liberty, there are no committees of correspondence, and the people don't know Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, George Washington, or Thomas Jefferson, other than who they are in their communities. As a matter of fact, they don't even know Benjamin Franklin's writing letters, because he started those in 1722 under the pseudonym Silence Dogood. So Otis is all alone, outcast, chastised, and charged with treason. February 1761, he is standing before those courtroom doors. Put yourself in his shoes. Because you see, the moment he opens those courtroom doors and steps into the jurisdiction of the government, because he's been charged with treason, he could be immediately taken into custody and hung the next day. He knew that. He had to know that. So what does he do? I mean, could you imagine Otis standing there with his two clients and saying, you know, on second thought, we don't have much support yet in public. So why don't we file a continuance? We can all go and I'll file a continuance, and we'll get another court date somewhere down the Rhine, and we'll concentrate on winning this case in the court of public opinion first. That way we'll have some backing, because you realize I've been charged with treason, and this whole case is against the government. So why don't we just file for a continuance? We'll come back another day. Or do you walk in and say, liberty is worth more than my life?